Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam, and in this video I'm going to talk about pruning plants that were winter damaged. And I know that many of you watching this are going to have much worse damage than we had here. I actually covered quite a few things here, and that event was less of a temperature event. I mean, yes, the temperatures did get quite cold, but a lot of the things that got damaged in my area wouldn't have typically been damaged at the low temperature we got down to, which was, I think, 12 or 13. I know many of you had 5 and 0 and negatives and those kinds of things. But what happened was that wind-driven cold. We went from 60 degrees that morning to 13 that night. And it happened in just a few hours, and it definitely desiccated a lot of the plants. A lot of the plants had not gone completely to sleep because it had just stayed so warm through the fall here. I still had flowers on things, when this event happened. And, I did cover, I put up a video at that time about covering a lot of the leafy evergreen things out here because I knew they could potentially vulnerable to it. But what happened was we got desiccation, which is just the wind coming across and taking the water out of the leaves of the plants faster than the plant is capable of bringing water up to the top. And then the water froze inside of it, cracked some of the insides of the plants and caused massive amounts of damage everywhere. Again, our damage is, we have very little in comparison to the photos that I've been sent and the questions that I've received. But I want to show how to go about recovering from some of the maybe more minor damage. If you have major damage, if the plant's just literally looks just toasted, you can go, down on branches. Here's a dead branch on this sugar cookie viburnum. You can go down, see if they're pliable, see if the branch is bendable. You can use your thumbnail and kind of scrape and see if it's green underneath. That's some indication that, no matter how bad it looks, that branch might actually still have some life in it. The other thing is, I just learned from being in the nursery business when we had winter damage in containers during the winter time, there are a lot of plants that can come back from their roots. And so if it's a plant that had been there for a couple of years, I will give plants until May. Our average last frost date somewhere around April 15th. Here, I'll give things well into May that look dead if I know there are things that sucker. And I know you're not going to necessarily know the list of things that can root sucker and come up from, just from their own roots or regenerate from their own roots. But some of the things you have might be those things. And so I'm going to give them until about May 15th. Another thing I brought up in another video was potentially, let's say they're in a very high profile spot and it's going to be, even if they're alive, it's going to take a long time. You can just dig them out of the ground, buy the thing you're going to put in its place, plant that, and then put those things, the damaged things, in those containers and see if they'll flush out in those containers, and maybe they'll come back for you and be able to go back in the landscape somewhere. Okay, a lot of words. This sugar cookie viburnum, pretty much, it's an evergreen viburnum. It lost 80% of its leaves, post that storm event. Some of the branches are much worse than others. Some of them have died all the way back into the bottom of the plant on this sweet viburnum. And then some of them are just knocked back, 6 or 8 inches. All I've done here is wait to see where the new growth was going to come out on the branch, okay? And so once you'll see, where these things are going to come back to, and then you can just cut them back to that level. So in order to make the plant look kind of semi-normal after this pruning, I'll probably come down, to where I say the vast majority of the stems on this plant have a bud on the side of the branch. And by that, I mean just new growth of stuff. If you can just get closer here. So you see where all the new growth is coming along the stem. And this for you on your plant might be another foot down into the bottom of it. It may be so early at this point here, I'm shooting this on March 1st, that you're not seeing any green along the stem. This particular viburnum is a zone 8 viburnum, and I'm in zone 7. And so it tries to wake up early every year. But I can see now, I could cut it, right here. And then I could just cut them all. I could just follow every branch down to where I have, any living part, just like that. Or What I'm actually going to do is just kind of go down here and just say, in general, you know, the plant seems to be alive from here down. Okay, like every branch, I've got a branch here where I can cut, you know, to about this height. And there's definitely a bud there. And so I'll just cut just above one of those branches on the edge of those stems. And just as quickly as I can go through this, cut them all down to about that same height. And then I'll have to probably reduce the width a little just to make the shrub look kind of semi-normal. But that's pretty much all I'm going to do to recover from something like this, where, you know, the plant's only been really killed about not that much of this one. It looked much, much worse. So giving things time. I've been saying that for 2 months now, is, you know, give things as much time. Some of these stems are completely dead, and they can be cut all the way down to the ground. That kind of thing will probably help the plant to get some light down in the middle of it if you get them completely pruned out. And this won't look its best when I finish pruning this, but I'm not that precise about cutting. You know, I'm cutting just above a bud, but I'm not trying to, you know, I'm not breaking out a ruler or anything to, you know, to make sure every cut is perfect or anything like that. Okay, all right, I just took some time and went through, and, you know, basically everywhere I've made a cut, right below that, new growth is coming out on the side of it. It may still be a little bit early to be doing this. Again, I've got another 5 or 6 weeks before I'm going to, you know, be past my last frost date, and sometimes pruning things can encourage some new growth on them. So I really don't want to be doubling down on damage, but I'm just kind of showing you this. This is the process. At some point, you're going to see whether the plant is alive by where it, you know, and then, you know, again, I'd wait until May or so to figure that out. And then if it hasn't come up by that point, it's probably, you know, it probably needs to be trashed. But sometime in between now and then, you're going to see it's either coming, if it's alive, it's going to come up from the roots right down at the bottom, and you're just going to take the top of the plant completely off, or somewhere along the stems, like on this sugar cookie viburnum, you will see where it's alive, and we'll just cut it down to that level. It may mean that thing, if it's a spring flowering thing, that you're going to lose the flowers for that spring. You know, that's life. But let's take look at one or two more. One other thing on that viburnum, it's not done losing leaves. Pretty much all the oldest leaves on that plant are going to fall off of it. And I'm surprised they haven't yet. Like 70% have so far. The other 30% of the leaves that were on it that night, they're coming off too. Got a evergreen dogwood out here in the front garden. It didn't look like it had much damage, and it's in the process of shedding its leaves as well. This podocarpus, we have 2 of these variegated podocarpuses, and the one back here next to the house was 2 things. It's had a little more wind protection, and I covered it. I forgot to cover this one, and I knew it was vulnerable. It probably wouldn't have been as vulnerable if it had been in the ground for a little longer, but I knew, again, this is one of those marginal zone 8 evergreen plants, or, you know, conifers for us, and it's got some definite damage on it. Now, I'm not going to cut this one yet because I'm not seeing, you know, where the growth is going to come out on it. And despite this stem looking pretty dead, I think it's actually going to flush out up here higher than I can see right now. And so if I was cutting it today, I would probably be just cutting it down to 4 inches or so. But I think it's actually somewhere along these stems. I think I'm going to see some growth emerge here in the next 4-5 weeks. And at that point, I'll cut it off. You know, obviously, I can tell some of this, you know, it's just dead. And it's good, you know, it's going to come off. But I want to see, again, where is it going to leaf out on that stem? And wherever that occurs, I'm just going to cut just above it. These things have root systems. So that sugar cookie viburnum was a 4-foot tall evergreen shrub. I've cut it down to a little over 2 feet tall. It still has the root system. The roots weren't damaged, and it still has a root system of a 4-foot tall shrub. It's going to come back very quickly. So any of these things you're cutting down that may look so bleak today, or at the time you're cutting them, it's still got a bigger root system than what the plant's going to look like, and they're going to recover pretty quickly. Here's a Dahlia, and this one really looked quite bleak post-storm or post-cold, because it lost almost all of its older leaves, but it's actually leafed out all the way to the tips. Not a piece of that branch had actually died. So by leaving it and waiting, you know, you can see, I'm saying let it leaf out along the branch and tell you where it's alive. Well, this one told us it's alive all the way out here to the end because it's got new growth coming on it. It's another one of these plants that wakes up a bit too early for its own good. The plant needs some kind of general, you know, tip pruning anyway. It's got branches that are just kind of longer than the rest, so I would just do my general, you know, pruning on it to, you know, to kind of neaten it up. But it doesn't need any, you know, storm recovery pruning, which it initially really did. You might be able to see Griffin up here in a chair. He's obsessed with a new puppy next door named Dahlia. It's a great name for our garden, our neighbor's dog, since we have so many dahlias in this garden. This Fats hedera is going to completely molt. Basically, every leaf is going to fall off of it. This is a combo between ivy, English ivy, and Fatsia. No sir, we're not that excited. And it's non-invasive. It's a climber that has to be attached to something, so it's not invasive at all. But it is somewhat cold sensitive, and that cold clearly has damaged every one of these leaves, and I think they're going to fall off. But I can see, and we're going to lose some of the stems on these. But I can see if Steph can get in here just a bit closer. So let's take this branch right here as an example. There's nothing along it. There's no sign of any new growth along this stem until I get to right here. There's a bud, a clear bud right there along that stem. If I take the branch below it, you can find the exact same thing right there. That's the first sign of life along that stem. So at some point in the next few weeks, and I'm gonna wait a little while longer. Again, this one's kind of cold sensitive, and if I start cutting on it now, I think I'll start forcing some new growth on it. So I'm gonna let it wake up on its own. By the time I prune it, I think we'll have lost most of the leaves that are on it. I'll cut it back to where it's budded out along the stem. That it will be much more naked down here at that point. This pruning that I'm going to do is going to force new growth from down there as well, and should fill it in. I think it'll look fantastic by the middle of May. But between now and then, I think it's going to get a bit thin. It just has started to lose the leaves. I thought that, you know, I covered it, and I thought after I had taken the cover off that I had escaped with just a few burned leaves, but it looks like to me, you know, maybe with some exception, I'm going to say 70+% of the leaves are going to come off of it. No big deal. It'll be pruned back to where it's telling me it wants to be pruned back, and it'll flush right back out. We have this European fan palm, and the intent of having it in a container was that we would bring the container in if it got cold outside, and that would prevent any damage from happening. And I didn't end up moving it. It's quite heavy, and I thought that the time it had in the container, it was going to be fine, and it is fine. It's totally fine, but it has taken a little bit of a beating, and so, you know, we'll carefully go in here. This thing has very thorny stems, and I mean, really quite wicked on the stems. But we have some pieces that are going to have to come out of this thing. I'm not going to go in here and do all of my pruning on it yet, because I feel like, you know, we still have a chance to get more frost and freezes before this is over with. So I'm going to wait to clean this up till closer to my frost-free date. I've got new growth right in the center. It looks great. Probably have a couple little sports coming up from the bottom. These aren't single trunk palms. These are more like kind of shrubby palms. By then I'll have a little more new growth in there. So by the time I go in here and I prune the really damaged pieces off, I think it's already going to be pretty full looking. But again, it's just one of those things. It's got to go through here, take out the worst of it. By the time I do, it'll have lots of new growth on it. This is a Wheeler's Dwarf Pittosporum you're looking at. We actually need to contain the width of this a bit. This is, you know, great growth habit for that little Dwarf Pittosporum. But you can see the winter damage that occurred on it. And so I need to do some general pruning on it. On something like this, where it has that kind of damage on it, and I haven't seen any new growth yet, I'm probably just gonna wait. These do flower and get a fragrant flower, so typically I'd prune them after they flower anyway. But I'm tempted to just go ahead, control the width on it, do a little top pruning on it, get it looking better. But I think that when a plant's under stress like that, I'm just going to let it wake up some. I'm going to see that it's growing, see that it's happy, and then I'm going to do some pruning on it. So that'll be several weeks from now. But it's gotten so wide, it needs to be narrower. It's eating a peony on the other side, so it's going to have some pruning done to it. lots of questions over the last couple months about rosemary. And here's a very sad rosemary. This is one that I covered one and didn't cover this one. And this is the result, is a very thin, very thin plant. I'm kind of lucky it's alive, honestly. I would imagine if yours is just completely black and you're not seeing any growth along the stems at all, you can go down, use your thumbnail and scratch lower, down on a branch. If they're still pliable like this, I can bend these, they're not breaking. Then I can tell they're alive. But again, it's just, this thing's just telling me where it wants to be pruned. The same as that viburnum in the front garden. I'm not getting any new growth up here in the top of it. But I am getting growth along the stem further down. So I'll just cut just above that, where that growth is, and I'll just get a general idea for about where it wants to be cut back to. Some of the branches are completely dead. Here's one that's, this one is completely died, and I'll just cut it to the ground. It gives more space for the rest of it. There's another one that's right beside it, same thing. This one is all alive, and I'll just come here along the stem and cut just above growth along the stem. I can be careful. I think this is another one that, I always say I'm doing things earlier than I normally would because I'm trying to show you on a, trying to show it in video content, how I'm going to treat these, how I would treat these things. But typically I would wait a little closer to our frost-free date because these stems are actually alive a little higher than what I just cut off, okay? So I could have probably waited another 2-3 weeks and seen that I didn't need to cut it back quite as hard as I did. But today, that's where it was telling me it was alive, and that's where I cut it down to. If yours, a lot of these are probably not coming back. If they just completely defoliated, completely turned black, maybe, and again, I will give stuff until middle of May. But these, when they die, they tend to just, tend to be dead. Well, there you go. There's some of the things. We've got some other, types of just minor wind burn damage. And I'm like that Pittosporum right there where I'm going to wait. I've got a camellia that looks like that. I've got several things that look like that. We're just clearly burned leaves on the outside of them. And I'm just going to wait, see where the new growth is coming out on them, let them shed some of those leaves that are definitely coming off. They're going to lose some of those leaves as new growth starts on them. And then I'll decide to where to prune those things later. But again, it's really about patience and then seeing where they're leafing out from and just cutting them down to that height. And again, they'll recover much quicker than you think. So prune them, fertilize them, mulch them, make sure there's no weeds around them, and they should recover pretty quickly if they're alive. Good luck with your garden this spring, and hopefully we won't get another one of those 60 degree drops or 50 degree drops in 3 hours ever again. Thanks for watching.